Now you are.
I really wanted the audience to hear that, so we got to repeat that again. Your last name is pronounced Linda.
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 Yeah.
Not Lindy.
No.
Not Lindy.
No, and my kids pronounce it Lind, and it drives me nuts.
Well, if your kids don't know how to do it, how the heck are you going to expect some fat old bookkeeper to do it right?
I'm just saying that all throughout the family history, in Europe, Linde is pronounced Linda. And when it hit North America, Linda is a girl's name. It reminds me of Johnny Cash and a boy named Sue.
A boy named Sue. There's a lot of good things like that, aren't there?
Yeah,
I think
I'll
I'll do up
tell
the
you.
rest of my
I got
shirt
kidded
work,
when I
but-
was in school in New Hampshire, and it taught me some lessons.
Yeah, you're an American too, aren't you?
I'm the kind of guy you like to give taxes with.
You're
I'm dual.
You're a dual citizen, right?
Yeah.
That's my business. Well, look, we're here, and if you happen to have turned in and you have a divorce thing, because I did send this out to a couple of thousand people saying that we were going to be talking to Carey Linde today about things like child custody and divorce. At your party on Saturday, you were telling somebody that I had a sign in the basement, and I couldn't ever remember you being here, and I couldn't.
I've never been here before.
I couldn't figure out how the heck
But
you knew
you and
about
I
it.
have
But I
met
must
several
have,
times, and I think you told me.
But I must have told. Why would I tell you that I have a Haight Ashbury sign in my basement?
Because I'm an old hippie.
Oh, you sure got a lot of exotic and neat stuff at your house.
Thank you.
And that
So do you.
And that experience on
10 times.
The experience on Saturday night with your friend from the Alaska Cafe, and
Oh, Charles, yeah. Isn't
he
he
was
great?
Well, he was fun, especially since he used to article for Harry Rankin.
Yeah.
And I knew Harry quite well, and his wife Connie, and so on, and Connie Fogle, and there's so many. And then you had, can't remember his name now. You had somebody at your party who came up and said they used to be my next door neighbor. They actually used to live in the basement right next door.
Who was that?
Well,
Not
his
Tom
wife.
Carney.
No, Tom and I ran in politically in 1978.
Yeah.
We founded a political party.
You ever ask him what he thinks about his sister, Pat?
Well, I know all about
Get him on
About
someday.
I know. He's,
A little expose there.
He thinks that Pat Carney sold out to the devil type of thing a little bit, but that's beside the point. But you had Tom Carney there, we go back a long, long time, and Melinda or Melissa?
Melinda Pearson.
Melinda Pearson.
Yes. Was she your neighbor?
Used to live right there.
Really?
And she works for you, I think, doesn't she?
Yes, she's one of my legal assistants.
Yes.
And she was she worked for me about 25 years ago.
Then she left and came back.
Yeah.
See?
I got a whole bunch of people who used to be with me 20 years ago that have come back.
But you don't have 7 ex-wives like I do.
Do you have 7?
Yeah.
Really?
And you're a divorce lawyer, so we're going to talk about divorce.
Not yours, though.
No, well,
Please.
we can talk about mine
Please.
if you want to. No, I mean, I had a wonderful divorce.
A wonderful divorce?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's another program, A Wonderful Divorce.
Oh, yeah. Well, remember, what's her name? Wendy Dennis wrote that book, Divorce from Hell.
Yeah.
And that was just an awesome thing, what she wrote. And about her husband's divorce. Not her husband divorced from her, but her husband's divorce from his prior wife. And divorces, there's that old joke, why do divorces cost so much? Well, you know that answer, don't you?
No, that's one I don't think. Well, my mad cow, I don't remember very much anymore.
Well, they cost so much because they're worth it.
Well, for you it was.
And I don't mean to be sarcastic when I say that, because it's a bad joke. And if you ask me, and I will make it public, I would far rather that I was still had my family together, my wife and the mother of my children that are still living in the house, etc. I would far rather still have a family unit together.
Yeah.
But if it has to break up, I think mine broke up quite well. That was okay, and you were a help in that, and so on. So, what I want to talk about is what I consider your specialty, though, because I've got a book over there by Michael Brennan, who I know as well, and that book is called Custody for Fathers. And Custody for Fathers is a wonderful book, because what it does is it tells fathers, husbands, how to behave in a divorce.
I got that on my website, too.
Do you?
Yep. I got a thing that says how the game is played. It used to say how the game is played, and it was aimed at fathers from the perspective of the judge, what a judge wants to see. And then in one divorce trial, a mother on the witness stand said, my husband is with a lawyer who thinks it's a game. So I had to go back and change the word how the game is played to something else
Mm-hmm.
because someone took it literally.
Oh, I see. You were the lawyer, so I
Suggesting it was
Thinks
all a
it's
game.
Well, it is a game in terms of an overall definition of the word game. It's theater.
Divorce, anything in court is theater. Everybody has their roles, their costumes, their positions on stage. The judge has got his costumes, he's up above, everybody comes in, take the witness stand, and it has nothing to do with truth or justice or fairness. It has to do with who can pull what over whom. All right? And the person who can establish some...
See no evil, hear no evil, speak. Yes, okay.
Well, that's what it is.
This is heavy stuff, and I agree,
No, but that's what
I
it
agree
is.
with you, because that's what he says in the book. Yeah.
So my website thing to fathers was you have to come across as the following, A, B, C, D. And if you can do that with sincerity and legitimately, you can't fake it, you'll get caught in the act.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's who you really are, then a judge will say you're a fit parent. And it's very hard for men to do that. At a time when they're angry, when a lot of men are AA personalities, businessmen, successful people, you get them into the court system and it's just molasses. They can't believe that you can't just make decisions like that anymore. It drags and it's expensive.
It drags on and on and on, and you are at the whim. Like as I say, I figured that I have broken up with 7 women in
7, really? 7?
in a marital relationship.
You and Elizabeth Taylor. How much does she have?
I have no idea. I mean, I know Elizabeth Taylor though, so I don't know. I should
ask
her.
her next time you meet her.
I will. I haven't seen her for 20 years, but but until my last divorce, and I owned a divorce service, you know that, for 17 years. And for 17 years I
can see why.
I was in the
cheaper for you.
No. I was in the Yellow Pages as a divorce counselor for property settlements and mediation, but and I could never really understand why people were in these conflict divorces when it should be so easy for 2 rational people who used to sleep together to sit down and say, here's what you got, here's what the law says, and here's what we should do.
Yeah, the magic word is rational.
Well, you don't get rational. If somebody is inflaming the other person, there's no rationality to it.
The biggest complaint I have about judges is that nowadays when you start a petition for divorce, the first thing you have to do is meet in front of a judge. Mm-hmm. And just talk about the issues. And these judges give this holier-than-thou speech. I'm sure you're both good parents and rational people. Well, it's so obvious that if the people were rational, they wouldn't be there. And they always assume that both sides contribute equally to the problem. That is never the case. Well, I shouldn't say it. There are some times when you've got 2 personality disordered husband and wives. I don't have anything to do with those. I just tell these if someone comes to me, I say, go off, get some counseling, come back. But typically, in my case, because I act for dads, I'm up trying to see their children, I'm up against a vast array of tragic and women whom you have to have nothing but compassion. They have issues in their childhood which they've never dealt with, and they take the children to fill some emotional gap in their own psyche. And they're the ones who drive this thing. And if judges would just call a spade and realize that we wouldn't be, the vast majority of cases settle. 2% of what goes in and gets filed ends up in a trial. 2%. So that kind of crazy personality disorders end up at the top, at the cream. So usually one has got some issues. And the judges don't admit that to themselves, or they don't want to admit it publicly. And I think that's a flaw. Call a spade and save everybody the problems. Just say, whatever. Get out of here.
Negotiation is what it should be all about.
That takes a rational approach.
But
and
if only 2% end up in trial, then the rest of them must end up with a rational approach.
Yeah.
Somehow.
45 to 50% of relationships fail. I got this dream, okay? My son went to school at St. George's, and friends of mine have gone to some pretty far out people. Remember Laurie at the wedding?
No,
I mean,
very at the bullfight and at your party. Yes.
With the burqa and the.
He was wearing a burqa with no tail end on the. It was cute.
He was afraid if he went public, he'd get a fatwa against him.
Yes.
So anyway, he spoke there. A lot of people I know have spoken there. I always wanted to go and speak at St. George and say, look, fellas, to the boys, would you go into an enterprise?
Did you go into a business,
a business
with
somebody where you're committing all of your financial resources for the next 20 years, etc., etc., in a business which, like restaurants, have a huge failure rate?
Or big failure rate.
Would you do it? The answer would be no.
Likely not, yeah.
So I'm saying, what about marriage? At that point, the bell rings, and they all say to me, oh, thank you, Mr. Linde, but we have to go. My girl's waiting for me. Mm-hmm. So the heart really overruns the mind every time in that department.
Well, it does.
You know that. You try. It's fooled you 7 times.
Well, no, almost 8. I was in a Dairy Queen last night, and if you've seen, my cars all have signs on them. In fact, my client today came because he was driving by my house and saw the sign. Lived down the street for 35 years. Only dinged on him a couple of days ago that this is what I did, and he's worked in South Africa and Australia and all over the place, and suddenly dawned on me that that's what I do, right? But that's beside the point. This Brit from the UK and his Canadian girlfriend come in, and can you help us? We want to get him in the country, and they've been living together for 2.5 years, and they started the paperwork because Canada allows you to sponsor a common law spouse into the country from within the country. But if I want to sponsor a American or a Brit or a Chinese lady or Philippine or wherever they happen to come from into the country, I sign a document saying I'm going to sponsor and be financially responsible for this person for 10 years. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I said to the young lady, I said, if he runs off, it was a very, very attractive woman. I said, if he runs off with a blonde, you realize that, and she was a brunette, if she runs off with a blonde, that you have to, and then he falls down and slips and ends up on welfare, that you have to support him for 10 years, do you? And she looks at me and says, what do you mean? I said, the paperwork that you signed to sponsor your common law husband in says that you will support him for 10 years. Do you not remember signing that? No, because people just sign everything. And I get at least a call a week, I think, from somebody who's...
Well, let me say that I am unaware, and I'm not an immigration lawyer, so don't take this as gospel. I'm unaware of the government ever coming after anybody to fulfill that. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Oh, they do.
They do, but in most cases, as long as somebody has some means of support.
Well, it's only if they end up on welfare.
Exactly.
Okay, so if they end up on welfare, you're responsible because they cannot be on the public teat for the next 9 or 8 years.
They're in love.
I understand that, but it's really interesting because the young ladies, when I told this young lady that, you could see this, like, boom. And she made a joke about it.
Yeah.
But there was a...
She's still going to bring him in?
I have no idea. No idea. Gave her a pen, said call.
Yeah.
So the situation is that marriage is a big deal. You can start off with a whole bunch of stuff, marry somebody, and because of what happens, end up with none of it.
Oh, yes.
Now, what your specialty is, though, and I don't think of your specialty as being money. I think of your specialty as being custody for fathers.
Kids.
Or visitation for fathers.
Kids.
You are there.
I can't market myself to kids because kids haven't got the boom and they haven't got they're not...
And they don't have the right even to do it.
So, when it comes to issues of children, the biggest issue for children is father time.
You believe that the child should have both parents involved in their life?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Equally. Yep.
And
I've been pushing this for 15 years.
Well, no, it's at least that long, because I guess it's that long ago that I first talked to you just about. So, and you have a website called divorce-for-fathers.com.
No, for men.
For men.
Divorce-for divorce-men.com.
Divorce hyphen.
We got a call once from a woman in the office.
Men.com. Yes.
One of my staff said, some woman, absolutely, totally irate, phoned up and said, I punched in divorce.men.com.
Yeah.
It's a porno site. Well, of course, we all jumped and went, and sure enough, it was.
And nobody ever spotted that before.
No, but I am divorce hyphen.
Hyphen.
Not
men.
dot.
Okay.
For men.
And just in case you end up in the other place. And what you work at is, I hear it all the time too, from a man who hasn't seen his kids for 12 years because his wife wouldn't give access, kept on moving, moved out of the province, moved out of the thing.
Those are awful cases. Awful cases.
And we got the CBC, was it CBC or CTV that did the documentary, and they had Robert Dean in there.
I think that was a private documentary done by somebody who then marketed it to one of the networks.
But it was shown, and I have a copy of it someplace, and it was very...
Robert Dean's is,
Robert Dean, and I can't remember the name of the other fellow, but they've got that Justice for Men, and they got a limousine that goes in the
there's
different parades and so on.
There's a private members bill. Dean's organization just emailed me. I've heard about it some months ago. There's a private members bill being put forward in Parliament to say something I've been saying for all these 15 years, that there should be a rebuttable presumption of shared parenting. And let me just take a moment and back up. Up until about 10 or 20 years ago, on property issues, okay, if the ranch was in the name of the husband, then every time there was a divorce, the wives had this expensive, difficult, and sometimes insurmountable task of having to hire lawyers to prove that they were entitled to an interest in the ranch.
Yep.
And after a while, the attorney generals of all the provinces got together and said, this is ridiculous.
Yep.
We're going to change all the laws throughout the various provinces because the federal government only can do a divorce. The federal government has no right to deal with property.
That's property division.
That's a provincial jurisdiction. So all of the provincial statutes were changed to say that immediately upon marriage, there is a rebuttable presumption of 50-50. Now, if you're only married for a week, if you marry one of your wives,
doesn't make sense.
And you're married for a week and you've got $1 million and she's got nothing, she might get $50,000. But if you're married for about 10 years, it's 50-50 no matter what. And that has cut down so much court time. Man comes into my office, sits down and says, I've been married for 7 years. She brought nothing to the marriage. I got all kinds of stuff. I'll say, well, 7 years, she's probably going to get pretty close to 50-50. Let's suggest she gets 40 and done with it. And it is just, they come in, okay, that's it, gone. I'm suggesting, and I have been for a long time, that with respect to children, there should be a rebuttable presumption of shared parenting. So, because for the last 200 years, it's been the case that if a parent, typically the father, not always, acting for women is sometimes very difficult, but the father has to hire a lawyer and try to prove to a judge that the children should have half time with the father. If that were a presumption, it would be the obligation of the parent who says it won't work
to prove that they have the right to more.
And unfortunately, one of the reasons I bemoan the loss of Wally Opal is that in discussions with him, he was very interested in that concept. Where it would have gone in the bureaucracy, I don't know.
Yeah.
I still say that the politicians have got this false fear of the so-called women's vote. My experience is that the vast majority of mothers, women, grandmothers, girlfriends, whatever, are strongly supportive of this. The real feminists who say that it is the obligation of a woman to carry her own weight are in support of it. The victim feminists or the gender feminists are dead against it. And the politicians have a fear that the gender or victim feminists are out there in vast numbers, which is totally false.
I don't think that's true.
And my definition of a victim or gender feminist is this. When you hear anybody male or female, talk about fathers or men, or write something about fathers or men, and if you took the word man out and you substituted black or Jew, if you had a what's the word I'm looking for? If you had a biased or racist or
comment in there, it would be
against
hate. It would be hate literature.
It would be to be charged with it.
Sure.
But they get away with these victim and feminists and gender feminists say it all the time, and nobody pays any attention.
Well, there's almost a presumption, as I understand it, that if you have a lawyer representing a woman in one of these divorces where things get tough, that if they don't make a claim of sexual predation on the child or molestation, they haven't done the job right.
That silver bullet.
Because I
Boom.
run into so many men who have told me that their wife has accused them of molesting their daughters or their sons in these situations, and it just doesn't make sense.
No. And you know where it is now? It's what I call the virtual allegation. It used to be that someone would make an absolute allegation.
Yeah.
Let me back up a minute. Historically, the tender years doctrine meant that women, children would go with women. I always say to my family law colleagues, if I'm acting for a woman, I'll walk into court and say, I act for the woman, give me the kids, give me the money. Rolling off a log. But when the concept of the best interest of the child started to move in, Richard Gardner, who was sort of the initiator, he was a psychiatrist at Columbia about the parental alienation syndrome. He has a brilliant analysis of this. When women realized that they couldn't just keep the kids because they were the mother, then started these false allegations of sex abuse. And that lasted for a decade. And then
or parental alienation.
Well, wait a minute. But sexual abuse of a child lasted for a while until it was sort of accepted by the courts to look at that very suspiciously. Then they started to alienate kids against the fathers. Unfortunately, now men do as much of that, maybe not quite as much, but more of that. So what's happening now, in my experience, is that the mothers no longer say, my husband or the father has in fact buggered the daughter, to put it in crude terms. Mm-hmm. They talk about the daughter came home from a visit, her vagina was red, this and that, and I felt I had to go to a doctor. The doctor says, is there any chance that the father could be abusing? Could be.
Always is.
Bang! To the ministry, the cops, the whole thing. That's where they're at now. It's very sophisticated. So when they get on the stand in a divorce trial and you accuse them of having made this allegation again, oh, I didn't say that. The doctor said it. But wait a minute. You raised, it's very, very subtle.
Yes.
They're always thinking, these women who have, and I say, I have compassion, and they're tragic individuals. They were either abused or abandoned as a child. The vast majority of these women who used the kids to fill their own psychic holes were themselves abandoned or thought they were abandoned or believe or were abused. And they used the children to fulfill their own emotional shortcomings. That's what I call maternal incest on a child. The parent's job is to fulfill the emotional needs of the child. It's not the child's job to fulfill the emotional needs of either parent. But that's what often happens.
That's interesting. We've got to take a break for a couple of seconds.
Why?
Because I've got something else I've got to do. We've got some sort of family little thing going on over there. I think maybe I have to dig out a set of car keys so my son can get out of here. Mitchell.
Go for it.
They get big and they take off with they're going to fireworks.
The fireworks. Right.
You live down by the fireworks. We'll be right back. Well, we're back again, and it wasn't my vehicle. It was
My
Carey's.
vehicle.
Carey Linde.
Your,
Carey Linde's
the approach
vehicle
to your
that was blocking.
You're on. What is the slope degree of your driveway?
It's about 50 or something. It's a really steep driveway.
You told me to park
45.
at the bottom, but I got one of these cars which says it's 4-wheel drive, but it isn't. It goes into
all-wheel drive.
No, it goes into 4-wheel drive only if it thinks it needs it.
Oh,
I want to be the one who decides whether it needs it. I don't like it.
No, you don't like that. Okay.
I mean, if I'm going to go into some river and I want to stop ahead of time, turn the horn hubs, put it in 4-wheel drive, and know it's in not wade into it, and then discover that the car may or may not think it's necessary.
Oh, it's that bad, is it? There's no place where you can punch a button in the glove compartment or something?
No, these cars would say they're 4-wheel drive, but they're not.
Well, I've got 5.
They only go into 4-wheel drive if they find themselves slipping, whatever that means.
What does this car cost?
I don't know. I'm leasing.
Leasing. Oh, well, I should never lease a car.
Why not?
I have 5.
Wait. You're a tax guy.
Well,
why
that's
not?
why, because you should never. I have 5.
No.
I have 5 4-wheel drive Jeep Grand Wagoneers that all together I paid less than $11,000 for all 5. So
I didn't see them out in your lot of 50
2 in
cars.
the back there. And one's at my daughter's got one up at Powell River right now.
I want to borrow your hearse sometime.
Talking about the kids and the money and so on, will never forget my 11-year-old daughter, who you met one time, I think, saying to me about 4 months into the start of the divorce, "Dad, whoever gets me gets the money."
Why?
She had it figured out.
Oh.
The kids all know. They know. She had it figured out. And she was 11 years old, and she had it all figured out. Whoever gets me gets the money, Dad. And
that's too bad.
So the kids
know this
as well.
Well, they shouldn't be into that at that
but
age.
The internet,
but they are.
The internet tells them everything.
Yes.
Okay. They know everything.
Yeah.
And trying to keep them. There's another thing I'm going to bring up. We were into what you were talking about, and isn't it true that 100 years ago the children usually went with the father?
Well, if you back up to several hundred years ago, all right, children were regarded as chattels, no different than the grand piano, and the baron or the lord kept the chattels, including the kids. Mothers had absolutely no right whatsoever to any of that, ever. In 1830-something, I'm bad at this, Westminster passed a statute which tried to address that and talked about, I'm not exactly what, but it sort of said women have some rights. That moved from women having no rights up through the 1800s into the 1900s, before the Second World War, women having all the rights. The Second World War came along, and it started to shift. Women were working in the factories. Women started to work more, and that's the inception of the idea that bringing the pendulum slightly back to center, that children and fathers had a game in it. But it wasn't really until the 60s or 70s that anybody started to look in the PhD programs, in the literature, in the journals, what is it that fathers bring to kids? Because it had always been assumed that mothers bring everything. And there's very little research back in those days as to what mothers actually bring. They didn't have to be. It was just assumed.
It was an assumption.
Yeah, and so now you find in the 80s and 90s a lot of research which talks about what is it that children get from their dads, particularly girls, funnily enough, which is a lot. It's absolutely critical. And that's where the modern approach, psychologically, is towards parenting. And it will keep changing. These things are never static.
I mean, when they first did that, it wasn't until 1858 that Lord Halcon stood up in the House of Lords in England and we had a Marriage Act.
Could be.
Up until then, men and women just lived in common law relationships.
Yeah.
And the only reason I understand that Lord Halcon brought up the Marriage Act, and we had a Marriage Act in the world, as it were, because up until then only rich people or special people or landowners got married, and they got married usually in a church, but they brought the Marriage Act.
And then divorce was a whole other private sector to them.
And the reason for the Marriage Act was that the state wanted a father to go after for support.
Absolutely.
And that was the reason for the Marriage Act. It had nothing to do with love,
I'm
nothing
sure.
to do with...
That's always the case.
In
Every time the government steps in, it's for money.
And in 1858, if you think about it, that's just, pasteurization is just, sulfa drugs are just, sepsis, septicemia, so on. The average age of a man was still something like 38, and the woman was something like 32. It was people when they said,
did we men ever have an age?
We lived longer because women died in childbirth. Women died in childbirth.
Yes.
And it's like Afghanistan right now today, where the men live to be 44 and women live to be 34 or 35 because they die because of poor health and this type of thing. Some live to be 88. But just a great mass of unwashed people die sooner. Anyway, making a long story short. So what you're saying to me is that, because this alienation of affection is the latest charge. That came up.
Well, that's a brand new, that's what I call the last judicial frontier. It's the last frontier that the judges have just barely started to put their toes in the water.
Everybody is every father, every mother is being charged with alienating the child against the other parent.
No, by no means every. No.
Not every, okay.
No, these are part of that last percentage which make it to the top and go to trial.
Okay, so it's only like 2%?
Oh, no, I don't know. 3%. I can't say that.
I run into so many people that tell me that.
Well, look, let's parental alienation occurs in every single case. Parental alienation is a parent saying something of the other parent that's negative. And it may be as simple as a child sitting in the playroom and the mom's in the kitchen on the phone, and the mom is saying to the dad, "Where's my alimony check?" That's an alienating comment, but that's typical. That happens a lot. Every kid experiences that, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a parent, father or mother, who consciously or unconsciously is setting out to fracture the bond between their child and the other parent. And that can have moderate or severe things. And the ones which are severe are absolutely unbelievable. Your audience would be stunned to know what some parents do.
Give me an example. Let's stun them.
Well, a recent one that we had, that we acted on, was a man and woman had a brief relationship. They weren't married. They didn't live together, and they had a child. When the child was about 12, the father went to court to get some kind of general access. It went to trial. The mother had alleged to the child and to the world that the father was a mafioso, had put contracts out to murder people, etc., etc., etc. The child had been so poisoned against the dad that she had want nothing to do with this child, with the father. Regarded him...
Was embarrassed because he was ashamed of her father.
More than that, it was venomous towards this man. And funnily enough, in the trial, the mother called her brother to the stand, who, under cross-examination, admitted that his sister, the mother of this young child, had put a contract out in all seriousness on the life of the father. Now, this is an extreme example, all right? That's an extreme example. Yeah, well, there's a lot of these. There's an awful lot of these where people are so sick. I mean, this woman had serious personality disorders. I mean, you wouldn't believe what some of these parents do to poison kids. And they are the hardest ones because those parents, historically they were almost always women, but as I say, some fathers are unfortunately getting into this.
Well, a father just recently was, fellow with a pizza parlor was just awarded $848,000. The wife was just awarded $848,000 and $14,000 a month, years in a retrial after the divorce because of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. But these are very hard because these parental alienators are very successful in seducing every aspect of the system to believe them. Every kind of welfare person, psychologists, ministry people, and even judges. I had a trial in front of a judge whose name I won't mention because I don't think he's fit to be a judge, where I presented all this evidence about how a successful, in this particular case, it was a father.
Mm-hmm. The father was the alien.
The father was, it was the father and his new wife, stepmother, who was a pediatric nurse who could have no children. And she and her new husband succeeded to steal, psychologically kidnap these two girls from their mother. And the girls would say, well, I want to live with my dad and my stepmom because I don't like my mom's diet, or the clothes she wears often are, frivolous, totally frivolous. Is this
on your website?
I don't want to say because I've made a comment about a judge. I don't want anybody to go back. I don't have freedom of speech in this department. Right. But the judge at one point on the witness stand, when I had my expert up there talking about parental alienation, he kind of said, I see here that Richard Gardner suggests that, welfare people can get sucked in. And he goes, even judges I see here can be brought into this and be deceived. The man was ignorant. He was totally ignorant. And after it all was done, he just, it's maddening. But those are the most difficult cases now, and that's why I say this is the sort of the new frontier for courts is to get into this. We recently had a case, that same case I just mentioned, about the mother and the mafia, and we had a judge in Vancouver order that the mother is not to see this girl for 1 year because she had 3 hours a month. And in those 3 hours a month of supervised access, she was able, through who knows how, to make this 12 or 13-year-old girl just collapse entirely back to where she was. And the girl's therapists would say that every time she goes and spends 3 hours a month, all of the gains she's made in that
everything
month
that happened up to then
disappears
because of the poison.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I think that particular judge who made that order, and this case is famous throughout North America now, had more guts than most judges have. In other words, this woman judge, saw this for what it was and said,
okay, and left the child with the father.
Well, the child was with the father, has been for a couple of years, but the mother has always had this couple of hours a month access. And that's all it took for her.
And an ability to just turn everything around.
Exactly, to destroy the last month's good work.
Intriguing.
It's a sickness that may end up in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, in number 5.
But you're going to have to write a book on this.
I haven't got time. You want to do it for me?
Well, no. Michael's book, the Custody for Fathers book, there is like a Bible. I've got a dozen copies of them. And when I've got a client that's going through a divorce or something, male or female, I'll give it to the husband and the wife.
I give away lots of books.
And I'll say, I buy them on eBay. Go and read this, or phone up Michael. Read this so that you understand what is going on. And don't get sucked into making claims because we'll negotiate down or something. Just get even and get
That's
equal.
The biggest problem, I think, in this whole business is that too many lawyers, the vast majority of lawyers, and the vast majority of counselors, most psychologists, tell these parents who are the target parent, well, don't worry about it, just don't upset her, it'll subside. That is so negligent. That is horrendous advice, and they should be sued for saying that.
Fight from the first minute.
The minute it happens, get in there and correct it with the child.
Right now.
Absolutely. The first time a child comes in and says, Mommy says you're such and such, now you got to be you got to finesse it, but you don't sit back and sort of hope that it'll go away.
Because
That's
it doesn't go
suicide.
away, it just gets worse.
Yep.
Is there an age that this thing is more? Does it work
Yes.
better in 7-year-olds and 11-year-olds?
Around 7, 8, 9 is when the kids are most susceptible to being seduced into this disliking the target parent. but for such crazy reasons.
Okay, let's go into something else if you've got an opinion. I'm sure you do. How did I want to say this?
Let me make a plug for that, my website. Not my divorce website, but the photo website.
The photo website. What's that?
Linde.
Linde.
LindaPhoto, PHOTO.com. LindaPhoto.com is fake.
That's where you got the bullfight pictures.
I've got a big thing on Burning Man and Lori. And
oh, you went down to Burning Man, did you too, eh?
I've been there 3 times, yeah.
3 times?
Yeah.
I've never made
Going
it
back
through.
next year, not this year, time out.
All right. I have about 1,000 emails about Burning Man, and I haven't been
Really?
there yet.
Oh.
And my niece went to Burning Man and came back with a souvenir. And
I'm not going to ask what that was.
well, it's a baby, yes. And, and that's another story.
What do you call the child? Burner.
Burner, no. Anyway, making a long story short, I know at least 5, let's make it 3 for sure, women right now who have had their children, male children. Husbands have been, for every husband that wants to, for every father that wants to be a meaningful part and so on, there's lots of fathers that don't either.
I wouldn't say
neglect.
lots.
They don't.
There are some fathers who just don't want to be involved. There's a lot of fathers who get such hassle from the mother that they just drop it.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. But I've got 3 really good ones right now where the sons are being alienated against their mothers.
By the fathers.
By the fathers.
Yep,
and now the son wants to go live with dad.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's
I get calls like this. I get
sort
lots
of cool,
of calls
but
on this.
it's not. It's an alien. It's a clear alienation.
Yep.
In my, I don't like what the fathers are doing.
No.
Okay, and I know in both cases
It's child abuse.
Fathers, yes.
It is out and out child abuse. And I get calls a lot from women who are the victims, the target parent, who haven't got the resources. To fight one of these is probably the most expensive aspect of family law. It takes an awful lot of groundwork and building to be able to get what you need to go in front of a judge and try to convince the judge, who is reluctant to think that human beings can do this.
But they do.
Oh, absolutely they do.
So is there an answer? Is there an answer to that? Should it be a fight, or should my sort of opinion is the fight just makes it worse?
No, that's what I'm saying. That depends.
Well, it's different than what you're saying. It'll go away. I don't think it'll go away. I think it will get worse. But
there are so many cases of children who are alienated against a parent who never get back to that parent. One of the interesting areas of research right now is in the areas of adults who were alienated as children against a parent. And there's some extraordinary stories out there. I mean, it is getting a lot of research, which is just sort of coming out. So stay tuned.
Okay. I have another book called Raising Ophelia. And I don't know if you've seen that book.
Sounds familiar.
It's a beautiful book. It's written by a psychologist in Nebraska.
Oh.
And she talks about all the things that happen with teenage girls and all the stuff there. And she's a child psychologist, and she does a radio program. And anybody that does and answers this kind of questions on
girls who don't have a father meaningfully in their lives statistically are doomed to having relationships after relationships after relationships, losing jobs. You know, the statistics are horrible.
Yeah. Well, they can have a father in their life, but even if the father's disdainful or doesn't have anything to do with them, it's the same thing, isn't it?
Yep. And the other thing which is extraordinary is that the single most common denominator of all men in prisons in the Western world is a missing father. If you ask every single man who's in jail throughout this country, the single most common thing that threads through them all is an absent father. Now you have to be careful, because an absent father is not quite the same as a weekend father. but it's the same gradient. And so we know it's no longer an argument that the more you can have of both parents in your lives, the healthier you're going to be as an adult.
Well, I think that everybody, I think the family should stay together if they can.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I
but
think-
listen, wait a minute. You know why it's all... Look, who's the Don Juan of modern society? The government.
Mm-hmm.
The government comes along to all these women who might be a little dissatisfied and says, leave that son of a bitch, let me make love to you. I will give you welfare, I will give you lawyers, I will do this, and I will do that. It's every aspect of society is against marriage. The church now tells people, women, well, if you want to discover yourself, go off and do that. I mean, every institution is working against families. I mean, it just isn't going to happen. There's no quick fix. To me, if you want to get another show going someday, it's capitalism. Capitalism is what has screwed this all up. I just won't say any more.
Okay. I want to thank you for struggling up here.
Well, let's come back sometime and talk about some controversial issues.
What controversial issues?
Well, I don't know.
Well, name one.
Oh, God.
I'll give
you some ideas off air.
Okay.
Look, I still got my tattoo from my...
Well, that's from your...
It won't come off. The kids say you put this on and it comes off, but...
Yeah. Well, sometime it will come off.
I hope so.
Yeah. My guest is being Carey Linde. Linda. It's spelled Linde.
I hope my son is listening.
And you can find out more from him, find out more about him on his website, which is divorce-for-men,
and women, anybody who's having problems seeing their kids.
If you're having trouble with custody, or trouble, not necessarily custody, but seeing your kids, parental alienation, this man, as far as I'm concerned, in Greater Vancouver, and knows more about it than anybody else I know.